All right, welcome back to Recreation and Sport Management 308, Recreational Sport Programming. And here we're picking up talking about sport policies. Last discussion, we talked about uh, things to keep in mind as you're putting together a program for sport and looking at the special considerations and focusing on your philosophy, and which includes your values, vision, mission, goals, and objectives, and then a lot of other considerations that you have to keep in mind. And so we're going to pick up here, continuing talking about and get or kind of shifting into looking at the policy side of it and keeping the policies that you set up for your events uh, so that people know and you and your staff know what's going to be the expectations. So policies are broad. They flow from goals and objectives. So part of that, those management drivers, goals and objectives, that goals and objectives give your program's direction. The policies kind of are broad based upon those goals and objectives, and also continue to give direction towards your events, programs that you're doing with sports. So, for example, participant eligibility. So, who's going to be eligible to participate in your event? Is it going to be individual? Is it going to be based upon skill level? Is it based upon age? What is the eligibility to be participant in it? Is it required that you are a part of the community, such as university recreation? You have to be a part of that university, whether it's faculty, staff, or student, right? So you have to be who's going to be eligible to participate in that program. What's the guidelines for sportsmanship? Okay, again, you'll see most tournaments will have some element of sportsmanship, some expectation of sportsmanship put into that. And so, what's your expectations there? Again, most of our focus or most of our events in sport will have that element that we want to teach or encourage sportsmanship. Okay, so that should be in there. What about leadership? What type of leadership will you need? Is it going to be where you're providing a league and you're providing the coaches to run that league or to help organize each of the teams and run those teams? Or is it going to be a tournament where the coaches come from outside and they're bringing them in to compete against each other, and you have to have staff to work your gate and to manage the fields. So what are you providing as far as trained and competent leadership there, and what are the expectations for that trained and competent leadership? You'll see some youth leagues will require their coaches to go through certification, National Youth Sport Association certification of coaches, and so you have to go through that and show that you've met that minimum standard before you can coach. And we'll talk about some issues that come out of that when that wasn't happening. Participation, looking at youth leagues, one of the oftentimes important policies is everybody must play. You must play everybody on your team, and so you can't only focus on those best people. You got to include everyone because you want that participation. And so, what are the guidelines there? Sometimes you'll see guidelines set up in baseball, how many pitches a pitcher can throw, or how many innings they can be out there, because you don't want to hurt those young arms before they have a chance to develop. So things to keep in mind with participation. A lot of times you'll have got rules and guidelines put in there for that, or policies. Okay. Alcohol and drug policy. Unfortunately, that is something that you definitely have to have in there. And just saying that basically your participants can't come under the influence. People in the stands can't be under the influence. Okay, and then get into reasons because you lower inhibitions, you make bad decisions when you're under the influence, and that causes additional problems within the program's events and activities. What about weather related? The National Federation of High School Sports, and as well as the South Carolina state has guidelines on weather and the amount of heat and humidity that can be in the air before, and at a certain point, games can't go on, particularly football. They can't be participating in because it's too hot, increasing the likelihood that somebody will suffer from heat exhaustion or heat stroke and pass away. And so we put in guidelines to help minimize that. What about lightning? Have to lightning strike within 10 miles, you have to shut down for a half hour. Okay, and every additional strike within that 10 miles adds that half hour. The half hour starts over again. So there's weather related. There's other safety considerations that you probably can think of that that organizations, agencies put in place to keep their participants safe. Some key policy areas. We hit some of these: eligibility, participation, registration. Registration could be a nightmare for parents and a league if it's not handled in the right way. What about protests? If you have a formal protest or participating in a tournament coming up in baseball, and if you have a protest, the protest requires a $100 fee. You pay $100 to use the protest. Okay. Setting up a policy. Okay. Forfeits, defaults. What's a forfeit? Forfeit if they don't show up right up at the time. Do you give them a leeway of 5 minutes? What's a forfeit? Sportsmanship, program control, coaching, and team leadership. All some of those things that we talked about. You also can get into what's the uniform, what's in equipment, what equipment's legal, what's not. A lot of guidelines put on baseball bats and helmets and padding. So you got to look at what the equipment is, what the guidelines are, what classifies as a uniform, who's providing those. Is it your own? You're providing your own, and then if you're providing your own, then it has to be checked, right, to make sure that it's a level of safety by the leadership at the of the tournament. Participant feedback. Is there a way that participants can provide feedback about the event? Awards, recognition. It blows my mind now that road races. My wife is big into road races, and she ran a race, finished second in the race, crossed the finish line second in the race. Somebody that started the race 10 minutes after her beat her because of chip time. Well, that's not a race. In my opinion, my humble opinion, that's not a race. Races, everybody starts at the same time, everybody runs the race at the same time, because doesn't that impact the competition if you don't know that person's there? Would she have run the race differently if that person would have started at the same time as her and been kind of going back and forth for second place, whereas not even knowing that she was there doesn't seem like it's a fair proposition, but that's what that one race had. So pre-participation medical issues, okay? Being aware, making the leadership aware of medical conditions prior to the event, and how do they provide that information. Alcohol and drug use, big issue that we try to minimize. Facility use, who can use the facility? Again, it's become the big issue with practice. I want to practice for our league. When do we have time available? When is my team going to be able to do that? What about travel teams that want to practice on that facility? Do we have policies, procedures in place for their practices? What about parents? Big issue when you work with youth sport. Time and time again, it comes back to parents. Kids, they're fine. They're out there playing. They're doing their thing. Parents are the ones that are the big problem. So what policies do you have in place to handle parents, to try to deal with this? Staffing, okay? Who's going to provide the staff? And then activity governance. So a lot of times there's a combination of policies and procedures you have in place from your agency to help your event run, but then you also can fall back on the governance of a governing body that handles that particular sport. So you may fall back on little league rules for the majority of your your policies and procedures, but then you also incorporate some of your own because of your special circumstances. Sport procedures. So policies are kind of the ideas, the broad point of view. Procedures are actually how you're going to implement those policies. So if we say eligibility is between this age or members of this community, like university recreation, how do we enforce that? How do we check on that? And that's where we get into policies and procedures of how carrying out those, or the procedures of carrying out those policies. So the policies of participation, eligibility, safety, and then procedure gets into everyone, and participation, everyone must play 2 innings or so many minutes. Okay. Eligibility, you must show residency, you must show that your ID card that shows that you're part of this particular community, birth certificates, whatever the case may be. Safety, no metal spikes in baseball. You see that a lot. No metal spikes to try to minimize injuries. A sportsmanship rating system where you can rate the other team or rate the other team. You can rate your, as far as sportsmanship, you can rate, the umpires. You can rate other members of that community that are participating in that event. How do you evaluate the coaches? Are you making sure that they're meeting that minimum standard by, going through certification, and then have them evaluated by parents or others? And no alcohol sold or allowed. Anybody that comes, it seems like they're under the influence, may be asked to leave. Those are type of things that are the policies, procedures that take place within our within sport a lot. SOPs. SOPs are standard operating procedures. These are usually on the bigger scale, more important circumstances that may arise within the sport. The more complex processes where you have to have specific actions. These are the specific guidelines. Standard operating procedure might be fall into place with lightning, or the heat that we talked about. Here's the standard operating procedure. If the lightning strikes within 10 miles, we clear the field for 30 minutes. That happened at one of my son's Saugatuck football games last year. Lightning hit within 10 miles. We had to clear the field, go sit in the car for 10 minutes or for a half hour before we were allowed to come back. So it's standard operating procedure. It's going to happen. There's no varying from it. This is what the safety requires, so you make sure that you do it, and you can't deviate from it. And a lot of times this comes back to risk management protocols. If somebody has a expected neck injury in any sport, here's what's going to happen. You can't stray from this. This is what's going to happen. We're going to bring the emergency staff out there. We're going to mobilize the neck. We're going to get that person to more advanced care ASAP. Okay? We can't vary from that and say, okay, well, this person seems like they're okay. Get up and run it off. And no, we can't do that. We have to follow these procedures. Rules that program related, they govern the behavior, stem from policies and procedures. So procedure says everyone must play. The rule is teams forfeit if they don't play. Games if they don't play their whole team. If they don't show proof, failure to show proof results in that person being an illegal player. They're going to forfeit games that person played. Metal spike, person seen with metal spike, they're automatically ejected. Sportsmanship, low sportsmanship requires you come and meet with the director of the event to go over why you got that low rating. Poor evaluations may risk not being invited back as a coach, or again, additional training may be required. Possession or under the influence, you're asked to leave. No questions asked. You're moved out. Okay, so you have those procedures, and then that leads to the rules that help govern it. We're going to stop here, and we'll get into some of the activity governance, and that'll be kind of our last video with policies and procedures. It'll be a short one, but we'll talk a